Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 23rd of October. As always, hope you're staying up to date on your latest weather changes, especially on the West Coast this evening. You can do that easily by listening to your NOAA weather radio or going to weather.gov/Alaska. Give us a call on the weather info line. As most of you know, the number's 800-472-0391. And as you're going through that, if you haven't done that in a while, take a pen and a pencil and paper and write down the numbers you're using to get to that forecast, and then next time you can punch those in a little bit faster. It'll work on your cell phone too. If you have your cell phone with you, you can try out National Weather Service Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube links, twitter.com/NWS Anchorage, for example, or NWS Fairbanks, or NWS Juneau. On Facebook, find us at NWS Alaska, and on YouTube during the afternoon, you'll find your daily afternoon map briefing. It comes up about 4 o'clock or so on the YouTube channels for NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks. Following this show through our broadcast partner at alaskapublic.org, you can watch the entire Alaska weather show there if you miss a little bit of a piece of it that you find important. Feel free to check that out anytime. Here's what's going on in western Alaska. High surf advisories started up today. They'll continue through tonight and into tomorrow for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula, many along the Norton Sound coastline, all the way down to Hooper Bay and including St. Lawrence Island. You'll notice if you're in Kotzebue Sound yesterday, we were talking about high surf advisories there as well. Those have been dropped for now. Southwesterly winds are picking up there as the frontal boundary is working from west to east. That'll be inland by tomorrow. With that comes a surge of water, a little bit of higher surf conditions, and certainly some rougher seas out there. Watch for perhaps a little bit of a rise in those coastal flood areas, probably about 1, 2, maybe 3 feet in some cases. But the southwesterly winds are going to stay with us at least until midday tomorrow before they start to slow down just a little bit more. So high surf advisory conditions are found around Norton Sound, the northern Bering Sea coast, and north of Hooper Bay to St. Lawrence Island. Here's a look at the bigger weather picture all the way out across the North Pacific and the Bering Sea. You can see several trails of moisture there, one of those feeding into our latest storm system here, working through the central Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula and the YK Delta now. That sharp cutoff is the frontal boundary working across St. Lawrence Island. Behind that, the ragged appearance of the clouds indicates some much colder weather moving off of eastern Asia. A look at the loop one more time shows our northerly flow now is shutting down across the west coast. That's been with us for a large part of last week. So instead we're getting into that surge that's going to bring up the water along the western coastline for many, again, especially north of Hooper Bay. A look at the rest of Alaska shows a lot of low clouds. Some of that's really just cold air being sensed by the thermometer that's kind of picking out the clouds for us in this particular satellite picture called an infrared satellite. You'll notice a lot of that retreated fairly quickly as we warmed up a little bit more in south central. It led to a fairly clear day, and for many in south central had a pretty decent opportunity watching the partial solar eclipse. Hopefully you had a chance to see that in your own way. Across southeastern Alaska, a weak area of low pressure continues to spin. It's not terribly organized at this point, but it is allowing some waves of moisture to work from south to north. Another batch of that is found just south and west of Haida Gwaii. Another wave of rain worked itself northward from around Petersburg up toward Juneau and Sitka earlier this afternoon. Looking westward once again, the main weather maker on the map tonight is the frontal boundary working through the Pribilofs and into the western coast tonight and into tomorrow morning. Behind that is another wave that will set up as we head into early Friday and cross pretty much all the way across Bering Sea as we get into a Saturday and probably into Sunday, sort of repeating the process. Here's a look at the weather chart now with high pressure across the interior at 1,014 millibars. A lot of the cloud cover was breaking up across southern areas, and just like yesterday, most of the white that you see across south central Alaska is snow on the hilltops rather than clouds in the sky. Scattered clouds continue across southeast by late afternoon. There was still some light rain across places very near Haines and Skagway and up toward Gustavus. Another weak area of low pressure was sitting just south of Prince William Sound. Wasn't much to write home about, but it was allowing that drier air to move southward through Cook Inlet and across Kodiak Island. There was still some low clouds, though, sitting south of the Kenai Peninsula. To the west, you can see that ragged appearance of the clouds across the western Bering Sea and north of Atka. Behind the cold front, we would expect to find cold air. Our frontal boundary is simply a change in wind direction, pressure, and moisture. And as that is working eastward, the air behind that is colder, and it's moving into the west coast. The southwesterly flow has reached the west coast from many locations there. The winds will continue to pick up tonight and into tomorrow. Some places around the Seward Peninsula we're also experiencing some moderate to occasionally heavy snow, some of that falling in Nome. Tonight's forecast shows high pressure moving north and east, closer to the Alcan border. To the south, conditions should remain fairly dry across the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, but by tomorrow morning, there's an opportunity for some light rain and drizzle. Across the Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and all the way up through the Chukchi seacoast, snow is likely to fall there, and several inches are possible there on top of some gusty winds. We saw some pretty blustery conditions, perhaps even blizzard conditions around Wales earlier this afternoon. Now you'll notice that pink shaded color, that's happening right over the oceans, the Bering Strait, Norton Sound, and all the way down the YK coastline, and including Nunivak Island. Ocean water right now is just warm enough to keep most precipitation at least in a rain-snow mix type form, or maybe even completely rain. But it's not going to be all a mix there once it moves inland. The conditions across most of the coast and into the interior are cold enough to support mainly snow at this point tonight. From St. Matthew down to the Pribilofs, we expect rain and showers to continue through the evening and overnight hours. The cold front should line up fairly squarely with the Aleutians as that slowly drops southward. It may park there for a little while. It may keep some gusts in the region. That should fall apart fairly quickly as we head into Friday afternoon, replaced by a weak area of high pressure south and west of Bristol Bay and just west and north of Cold Bay and Falls Pass. Low pressure sitting south of the Kenai Peninsula and just outside of Homer will work its way southward, kind of recycling itself into this zone of low pressure across the eastern Gulf of Alaska. That will continue a chance for some light rain across parts of southeast throughout the daytime tomorrow. To the west, another wave of low pressure working off of eastern Asia will set up another burst of westerly winds coming across the north and western Bering. Expect southwesterlies to return as we get into Friday afternoon. The temperature may warm up ever so slightly, and that might push a better chance of rain into areas around Norton Sound and north of Hooper Bay once again. If you're north of Nome or east into Norton Sound, you might see some snow falling throughout the day. The chances are the better push of that will happen toward the interior, the middle Yukon Valley, and south and west toward the Alaska Range, and generally north of Dillingham is where we expect a better chance for snowfall tomorrow. South of that, including parts of Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern chain, expect some showers to form. And around Prince William Sound all the way to Yakutat, we expect some wet weather to pass through from time to time. Most of south central looks to be dry with one exception. If you're in the hills, you'll probably see at least some passing snow. For Saturday, that starts to dry up with high pressure still sitting fairly close to Eagle and Northway right over the Alcan border. And that should send a little bit of drier air down through Cook Inlet and over the Alaska Range. You'll see that kind of spread out across the Gulf of Alaska. Now, that may push some of that wetter air into parts of southeast, all the way from Ketchikan and Nanette, all the way up through Juneau and Yakutat, and over the Wrangell-St. Elias region, we expect to see snow falling there. Some of that could reach into Gulkana and the Copper River Basin. The cold front will work through the YK Delta and probably passing eastward through Kotzebue and into Red Dog Mine, and the warmer air will bank up across the southern Brooks Range. That should keep some snow showers forming in the north and western parts of our state around the Noatak and Kobuk valleys for sure, maybe the Koyukuk Valley as well. The cold front will start to push southward once again. It's not going to have as easy of a time as it's doing tonight, so this is the second wave we're looking at again. As that continues working eastward, this boundary here will probably weaken somewhat, so the focus for precipitation and any breezes with that will probably line up pretty squarely with the west coast and generally north of the Bering Strait and into the Chukchi Sea as we get into the weekend. Here's a look at current temperatures then as we saw them at 3 o'clock. Readings were in the mid to upper 40s for southeast around Haida Gwaii to Craig and Klawock. Temps there were in the lower 50s. We also saw some fairly warm weather up around Skagway today. Temperatures by mid-afternoon were nearly 50 degrees in most areas. Mid-40s around Prince William Sound. Anchorage was holding in the upper 30s by late day. Homer and Seward were both at 44. Traveling up the Parks Highway, we see temps in the mid-30s there. 25 around Copper River Basin and Glen Allen. 24 in Fairbanks. 22 for Eagle. And just a little bit warmer there in Northway at 26. Around Fort Yukon, temps struggled out of the low teens today, holding there at 12 by 3 o'clock, 18 for Anaktuvuk Pass. The Arctic coast was showing temperatures in the lower 20s from Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 23 in Barrow, 19 around Wainwright. Kotzebue Sound was showing mostly teens and 20s by late day. Shishmaref was 28. Nome was 32, and just to the west, Wales was 34, but that was a really uncomfortable 34 with wind gusts there approaching, I believe it was the 40-mile-an-hour range there, and also some poor visibility and some falling snow. 39 degrees around St. Lawrence Island and Savuga, with the Kuskokwim Valley showing temps mainly in the upper 20s. Bethel was 28, Hooper Bay was 35, and Nunivak Island, showing what the water temperature can do right now, was looking at readings only in the lower 40s. Around Bristol Bay, we saw temps in the low 30s there. Dillingham was a little bit milder than King Salmon. 30s and 40s all the way down the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 45, Unalaska and Dutch Harbor 47. The Pribilofs in the mid-40s and mid to upper 40s for areas around Attu, Adak, and Atka. Now on to low temperatures for tonight. Single digits and teens are expected under that high pressure system for the interior. The Arctic coast in the teens and 20s. Seward Peninsula also looking at temps in the upper 20s to lower 30s. Kotzebue Sound may be a little bit colder. The Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta near the coast will hold on to temperatures in the upper 30s to about 40 degrees, but once you move inland just a little bit more, you'll notice readings drop off fairly quickly into the 20s. Bristol Bay, King Salmon, and Dillingham, you're looking at upper 20s, 43 for St. Paul, and lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and most of the Aleutians, with south central dropping into the lower 20s tonight with dry air still in place. High temperatures tomorrow will warm back into the upper 30s around Anchorage, South Central, and the Matanuska and Susitna Valleys. Kodiak, you're looking at 46. For southeast, upper 40s to about 50 degrees for most areas there. Yakutat around 46. The Middle Tanana Valley, including Fairbanks, should see a high close to 27 degrees. Fort Yukon will be nearly 20 degrees. Ambler and Bettles also in the mid to upper 20s. And Aktuvik Pass drops to the mid-teens with the Arctic coast in the lower to mid-20s, a little bit warmer west of Barrow. For Kotzebue Sound, expect high temperatures tomorrow, back in the lower 30s. Nome's up to 36, and milder conditions there around Nunivak Island, and the Pribilofs still holding in the lower 40s with the Aleutians back in the mid to upper 40s once again. On to flying weather now. In your aviation forecast, we see IFR conditions setting up around Barrow all the way down toward Wainwright and points west into the Chukchi Sea. A little swath of IFR conditions there south of Nome into areas around Deering, and then westward down toward about Hooper Bay. Otherwise, the northern half of the Bering Strait and sort of the Bering Sea should be under MVFR conditions. This is generally in the afternoon there. The morning weather should be a little bit worse across the west coast and probably a good part of the western Alaska range. So by the afternoon, some improvement will be noted around Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Upward around Rainy Pass and probably Windy Pass, you'll be dealing with spotty IFR conditions with improvement happening slowly into the afternoon. And for southeast, expect MVFR conditions by late afternoon south of Petersburg all the way to, well, let's say Wrangell and probably Ketchikan and Klawock and Craig, maybe Hyder as well. And MVFR conditions on the Bering Sea coast south and west of Pilot Point all the way to about Adak and Atka. On your pass conditions then, Aktuvik Pass and Adigan Pass, we expect to see VFR through most of the day. Things look pretty good there, and the wind should not be that bad. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as we said, probably looking at some improvements during your day on Friday. Rainy Pass will probably move into MVFR and maybe hold at IFR through a good part of the midday hours, and then maybe lean back over toward MVFR. So watch for some changes there in Rainy Pass during the day. That's probably got the most question marks. Windy Pass, VFR through MVFR conditions throughout the day. Isabel Pass also leaning over toward MVFR as your Friday goes on. Montasta Pass looks fine at this point. Tanita Pass may move over toward IFR conditions fairly quickly in the late morning to midday hours. And Portage Pass we expect to see to turn over to IFR by late afternoon. And Chilkoot and White Pass should see improvement starting out at MVFR and leaning over toward VFR by the end of the day. Freezing levels show the cold air is certainly in charge at this point across the lower levels, and as far as any warm air aloft goes, a lot of that has been pushed southward now by tomorrow morning as that frontal boundary is working in from west to east. You can see some higher levels there around the Aleutians with freezing levels about 4,000 feet or so south of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and then from Haines and Skagway and Yakutat southward, levels go from 2 to about 4,000 feet when you reach the Dixon entrance and Haida Gwaii. Icing potentials there, of course, with a decent westerly wave moving across the Bering Sea coast. You try saying that 5 times fast. Moving across the central Alaska interior. Icing potentials generally below 10,000 feet up around Barrow and probably out toward Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. You might find some occasional moderate. We see some additional rounds of higher moisture content there across the middle Tanana Valley and also around Prince William Sound. Most of this, though, once you get into south central, you probably have to go above 6,000 feet to find any decent risk for a light to isolated moderate. West of Hooper Bay and into the Norton Sound region, St. Lawrence Island, and the Gulf of Vanadier, climb above 4,000 feet, and you'll probably run into some light, maybe isolated moderate, perhaps even occasional moderate there if you get over St. Lawrence Island. Other than that, looks like conditions are drying out fairly quickly to the west. Once that next wave sets up and gets sampled a little bit better, we'll have a better idea about what the icing potential looks like into the weekend. Jet stream potential now shows low pressure working its way right across the Kamchatka Peninsula. This burst here is moving that surface weather along at a fairly good clip tomorrow. Wind speeds aloft at 30,000 feet, run between 70 and about 100 knots to our west of Alaska. And then we still have our pronounced trough driving the weather for the lower 48 states and also helping to cycle up some of those weak surface storms into southeastern Alaska. Wind speeds there on the western side run from 80 to about 100 knots. At 9,000 feet, our next weather maker is showing up across the west. That low pressure system across eastern Asia has a pretty predominant westerly flow and becomes southwesterly here after the winds turn past St. Matthew and the Pribilofs. The winds are a little bit stronger north of the Bering Strait. And north of that region, we find winds from 25 to about 35 knots with a generally light westerly flow across the Arctic coast and over the interior, and low pressure steering in winds from the north and west across the Gulf into that weaker area of low pressure west of Haida Gwaii. It's producing a little bit more of an offshore flow for tomorrow at this level for southeast, about 15 knots there from east to west. At 3,000 feet, we still have our west and southwesterly flow showing up here across the Bering. Light westerly winds across most areas in the middle and upper Tanana, or the Yukon Valley, I should say, and a northwesterly flow working its way across the Kenai Peninsula with west winds moving across the Aleutians from about 20 to 25 knots. So if you're worried about turbulence tomorrow, chances are you're going to be focused on that western storm as it works into the coast. Look for some chop across the western Brooks Range, probably east of Kotzebue and certainly east of Shishmaref. You'll find some light to isolated moderate. South of the Seward Peninsula, which may include the southern coastline there, below 5,000 feet, there's a pretty decent chance for some occasional moderate there. We saw quite a bit of turbulence reported high in the atmosphere today with a lot of the commercial flights moving westward. And along the Cook Inlet to Kodiak Island, watch for some chop there that could reach the moderate level. That's a look at your aviation forecast. In just a few minutes after Stargazer, we'll be back with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Trick-or-treating with the 7 Sinister Sisters. Hey there, stargazers. I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory.
And I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Plot Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida. We're here to help you find your way around the sky tonight.
Because Halloween greeting cards often depict a witch riding a broom in front of a full moon, many people have the mistaken notion that there's a full moon every year at Halloween, when in fact, we won't have a full moon on Halloween again until 2020. This Halloween, the gibbous moon will be trick-or-treating in the sky with Mars, Jupiter, and Mercury.
But there is something you can see in the night sky every Halloween that is even niftier and definitely spookier, because every Halloween, the Pleiades, the 7 sisters, fly high across the sky that night. Let's show you. Okay, we're facing east before dawn, and Jupiter and Mercury will be visible. Jupiter will be very bright, and you can use the Big Dipper to arc to Arcturus and then march onto Mercury.
Then look southwest, about an hour after sunset Monday night the 27th, 4 days before Halloween. The first thing you'll notice is a young crescent moon. There's not enough time for the moon to reach the full phase before Halloween.
So, no full moon for the witch to fly across this year. Just to the moon's left, you'll see the bright reddish-orange planet Mars. Mars will remain low in the southwest evening sky for the rest of the year as Earth leaves Mars farther and farther behind as we both orbit the sun.
Let's advance one day and the moon will fatten up a bit and move above Mars on Tuesday evening.
Let's go one more day to Wednesday evening. The moon's a bit fatter and a bit farther from Mars.
Thursday night, the moon is waxing more and has moved farther east. Notice how much the moon moves from one night to the next.
Friday night, Halloween, the moon is still a long way from full, but there is a Halloweeny object in this evening sky. Let's turn and look northeast.
And the Pleiades are just rising. But why are the Pleiades and Halloween linked in so many people's minds?
Let's quote Jack Horkheimer on this one. To many people, long ago, when the Pleiades reached their highest point at midnight, it was a signal that this was the time of the year to honor the dead. Many peoples believed that a great ancient cataclysm occurred when the Pleiades were overhead at midnight, such as the Great Biblical Flood or the sinking of Atlantis.
The belief was so widespread that in Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun, Teotihuacan, was built to align with the setting of the Pleiades, as were all the city's west-running streets.
And in ancient Greece, several temples were lined up with the rising and setting of the Seven Sisters.
The Aztec and Maya not only believed that the world would come to an end on one of these Pleiades overhead at midnight nights, but were convinced that the world had already been destroyed and recreated 4 times on just such a night.
Should we rename them the Seven Sinister Sisters?
Although the Pleiades no longer reach their highest point, that is, culminate exactly at midnight on Halloween, as they did in 1000 BC. Nevertheless, they are still very high in the southeast every Halloween at midnight, as a modern reminder that our ancestors were deeply moved and affected by the cosmos and used many cosmic coincidences to determine important religious and ceremonial events in their life.
And for what we can see this year, get outside and look up after sunset at the young moon near Mars next week. And get outside this Halloween or any Halloween at midnight. Look high in the east for the beautiful cluster of stars known as the Pleiades and the Seven Sisters, or as Jack liked to call them on Halloween, the Seven Sinister Sisters.
And as you look at them, remind yourself that these same stars have been seen by thousands of generations who have gone before us, who saw them as very important in determining their own special days of the year when they honored their dead.
And although it might be a bit creepy, don't you agree that Seven Sisters at midnight are even better than a full moon at Halloween? I mean, 7 witches beat a full moon any night. Keep looking up.
Here's your marine weather now in southeast with that weak area of coastal low pressure sitting just south and west of Sitka. We've got an offshore flow about 20 to 25 knots with seas around 10 to 11 feet. Winds are a little variable inside the inner waterways, but we have a predominant northerly flow coming out of the Lynn Canal and making its way through Stevens Passage and Frederick Sound. To the south in Clarence Strait, a southeasterly flow at 25 knots is producing 7-foot seas. Heading into Yakutat tomorrow and into Saturday, the winds will switch around to more of an offshore flow. Look at that northeasterly flow. Still pretty light, 10 knots with a 6-foot sea. And our offshore winds continue from Gustavus southward all the way to Craig, where we start to pick up a little bit more of a southeasterly flow. Those winds are running around 20 knots. Northerlies continue inside the inner passages there, 20 knots south of Juneau to Petersburg with a 4-foot sea. And now the winds in Clarence Strait are running from the north to south, 15 knots there with a 3-foot sea on Saturday. For south central, light easterly winds are outside of Prince William Sound with a 20-knot flow. 5-foot seas are expected there. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound running only at 15 knots, so that's not too bad. Northerly winds coming down the Cook Inlet around 10 to 15 knots. Seas are picking up from 3 to 4 feet, and west and northwesterly winds are cutting across the Barrens and over Kodiak Island. The strongest winds will be west of the Barrens there with a 7-foot sea and 30-knot winds. By Saturday, the northwesterlies continue there, but they're diminishing somewhat. Northeasterly flows found south of Kenai, and the winds become variable across the northern Cook Inlet with only a 2-foot sea expected there. Northeasterlies inside of Prince William Sound switch to more of a northeasterly flow with a 2-foot sea continuing, and northwesterlies will be found outside of Resurrection Bay at 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Westerlies east of Kodiak at 20 knots. Across the Alaska Peninsula on Friday, expect northwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay. You're still going to be watching for some higher gusts south and west of Castle Cape to Chignik, 25 knots with a 7-foot sea. Westerlies south of Sand Point and King Cove also around 20 knots. By Saturday, those winds diminish even more and become variable. Westerlies east of Chignik with a 4-foot sea in the Pacific, and 4 to 7-foot seas are expected in the Bering with a west and southwesterly flow around 15 knots heading into Bristol Bay at this point to start the weekend. Across the Aleutians, a west and southwesterly flow on either side of the eastern chain. 15-knot winds are expected there with 8 to 9 foot seas and 6 foot seas on the Pacific side. Winds will be a little more variable around the central islands thanks to a weak ridge of high pressure setting up there. And then we get back into our west and southwesterly winds from Kiska all the way out to Attu from 20 to 30 knots. By Saturday, westerlies are continuing around the Bering, 15 to 20 knots there with 7 foot seas, 6 foot seas across most of the Pacific with an exception south of Unalaska and Nikolsky at 5 feet. Across the west, we're holding on to those west and southwesterly winds with 8 to as high as 11 foot seas out around Attu. Now here's that southwesterly wind we're talking about and the reason we have high surf advisories from Hooper Bay northward into Norton Sound and around the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Those southwesterly winds will continue tomorrow around 20 to 25 knots, 35 knots out around St. Matthew. 12 foot seas are expected there, 8 foot seas around the Pribilofs, and 8 to 10 foot seas from areas north of Nunivak Island to St. Lawrence Island. High surf conditions mean there might be some coastal flooding as well as high breakers around 6 to 8 feet there closer to the coastline. The additional storm surge might be about 1, 2, maybe even 3 feet in a few areas. As we get into Saturday, the winds change a little direction north of Nunivak Island, becoming a little more westerly there, but most areas are still dealing with the west and southwesterly flow for Saturday and still running around 25 to 30 knots or so. 9 to 12 foot seas are expected north of Nunivak Island to St. Lawrence Island, 12 foot seas around St. Matthew, and 7 to 8 foot seas from Kuskokwim Bay out toward the Pribilofs, which sees westerlies at 20 knots. Now for the Arctic coast, look for easterly winds still producing heavy freezing spray. Those warnings continue tonight. 25 to 30 knot winds are expected. And you'll notice the winds across the Chukchi Seacoast have become southerly, 20 to 25 knots for Friday, becoming southwesterly just outside of Kotzebue Sound on Saturday, and southerlies west of Point Hope with an 8-foot sea there, and southeasterlies from Point Lay to Wainwright and Barrow as we get into the start of the weekend. Let's recap your weather once again. A frontal boundary is working into the west coast of Alaska tonight and into tomorrow. By the early morning hours, snow will be falling across the Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline all the way through Seward Peninsula, Norton Sound, parts of Kotzebue Sound, and the coastline itself may see a little more of a chance of rain and snow. Most areas in south central stay dry. Southeast still looking at a light chance for some rainfall there and along the Aleutians with snow continuing across the Arctic coast. That wave moves quickly to the east and begins to fall apart, brushing some of the mountains with a little bit of snow, showers for southeast, and another wave moves across the Bering quickly Friday and into Saturday with another surge of southwesterly winds working up the coastline heading through the rest of the weekend. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.